John David Curtin, native of Mean Gorman in Newmarket in County Cork, joined the fledgling Garda Síochána on the 15th of April 1922, and he was allocated the registration number 783, meaning that he was the 783rd member to join the fledgling Garda Síochána. He had been active in the War of Independence, and he was to have a very productive career in the Garda Síochána, which unfortunately ended in his assassination and ambush on the 20th of March 1931 outside the residence where he was living in Tipperary with his good wife Maureen. That was at Friarsfield House, which was a short distance from Tipperary town. Also the residence of the well-known Mansura family, and he had been living in the main house in that complex. He had a most interesting career in the Garda Síochána. He was initially first stationed in Donegal, Garda headquarters, Manor Hamilton, Granard, Tipperary, and he was promoted sergeant in 1922, inspector in 1923, and a superintendent in 1925. Now that kind of rapid promotion was very common in the fledgling Garda Síochána because all of the young men, and it was all young men who joined the Garda Síochána then, were in their late teens, early 20s, that age group bracket. So the RIC had been disbanded and very few, about 200, stayed on. But in relation to the circumstances of John Curtin's killing and assassination, as I've said already, and we would see in the text, that he had been on an inspection that particular night. He had very significant success against IRA elements in his district who had been drilling and using arms and were generally part of what was almost an open rebellion against the government of the day, which was a Cumann Gael government. I guess Fine Gael in our terms. But he also was a very credible policeman for a whole lot of other reasons. He had some very good detections in Killarney. He had a very interesting investigation, a poisoning case in Granard. So this was an all-round young police officer who was certainly going places in the Guards. And he did not carry a firearm. He was not somebody who carried a firearm on duty, although he would have been well entitled to do it. On that particular evening when that, as we would see, when that outrage happened, his car had been driven to the entrance to the house, which was a semicircle with a traditional wrought iron gates, two sections. Now those gates were normally left open, but the assassins who lay in wait for him behind the wall of that thing had pulled one across. So when John Curtin arrived, he got out of his car and he went to obviously put back the gate that had been left half open. And at that stage, lights of the car were on, the engine was running. He was shot down in cold blood at that particular point, and probably the last killing, or the last bullet that killed him, was fired at very close range. There were scorch marks on his overcoat. The question here is, why did it wait so long from 1931 to 2024 to recognise him? Well, there had been attempts to recognise him, but he was largely airbrushed out of the narrative right up to 2010, when in 2010 there was a ceremony opening a special Garda of Remembrance at Dublin Castle to members of the Garda Síochána had fallen in the line of service, and his name was mentioned in that connection. But previous to that, on the 50th anniversary of his death, the Gardaí at the time, the Commissioner, declined to have a memorial or a room or a lecture hall in the Garda College named in his honour. It was a kind of this ambiguous minute. It said it was a good idea, but not just yet. And the question was, of course, why not just yet? In 2022, I was very pleased to be involved as a member of the Garda Síochána Retired Association, and also in a personal capacity in a ceremony that was organised locally by Gardaí in Tipperary to commemorate and obviously memorialise his memory, because 2022 was the centenary anniversary celebrations of the Garda Síochána, in this case John Curtin, and that ceremony was held on the 21st of March 2022. Now, one of the main driving forces that kept his memory alive was now a retired Chief Superintendent Donald O'Sullivan. Now, Donald had campaigned long and hard in the 80s and contacted members of the Curtin family, made representations within the Garda Síochána that this man should be remembered, and he tried every single thing and did not succeed. But it came to my turn, I guess, in more recent years, because I'd always been interested in the circumstances surrounding the murder of the superintendent, who after all was the most senior member of the Garda Síochána, had been murdered on duty. And Donald very kindly shared his information with me, cooperated in every way. So it was a pleasure to be there in Tipperary on the 21st of March 2022 to pay public tribute to John David Curtin. The very, very sad side of this, well, we've just been talking about the official Garda side, as where his young wife Maureen was pregnant with twins at the time, and she was obviously tremendously shocked by the occurrence and probably never truly recovered from it. She was delivered of the twins sometime later, and both of those little babies died. So there's a very hard personal tale in that. In the course of the paper, we'll discuss in detail the circumstances of the investigation and the overall impact. The political thing, though, is very important as well, because in 1933 there was a change of government to a Fianna Fáil government, which had it was then in overall majority in the Dáil, having returned in 1932, but didn't have an overall majority, and many things were to change. So there was a very strong bias in the Fianna Fáil of the time to try to rehabilitate, if that is the correct word, the members of the IRA who were still agitating and taking up arms against the state and against other targets as well. And it wasn't until 1936 that the IRA again were banned by the Fianna Fáil government, and of course that led to a fairly vicious campaign and eventually to murders of further Gardaí in the 1940s, including the murder of this Detective Sergeant Dennis O'Brien, who was shot in 1941, and in a later post I will be talking about Dennis again. He had been assassinated at his house as he left his house or his residence in Ballyboden in County Dublin. But I'll return to his story at a later stage. So it is fitting and proper that a posthumous award of the Gold Scott Medal should be made and presented to the relatives of Superintendent John David Curtin. Long overdue, but appropriate nevertheless for all of that.